afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of Brant County Council. It's November the 28th, 2023 at 3:30. Attendance has been taken, and Councillor Miller is the only one not with us tonight or today. Second thing on the agenda is the approval of the agenda, knowing that nothing's to be added to a special council meeting. All those in favor? I'm sorry, mover and a seconder. Councillor Pierce, Councillor Oakley. All those in favor? Carried. Declaration of pecuniary interests. No one has any. Takes us right to number 4, the reason why we're here, and that's our delegation. Darren, 4.1. If you'd like to come up and introduce your delegation, please.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm going to introduce Darren just before we get started. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to today's session. Thank you for coming out in the snow. It looks okay right now, so hopefully it'll be okay when it's time to leave. So today's just a chance for us to come together and build our knowledge and learn and ask some questions. So we have about 90 minutes. It may or may not take that long, but you also have time to ask lots of questions and we can have some discussion. So feel free to jot things down that you might want to ask about, and we can definitely chat through those at the end. And I just wanted to mention, just for a bigger, fuller picture, this work will continue to be expanded through our arts, culture, and heritage strategy that will be coming very early in the new year, which is really exciting. One of our big objectives is truth and reconciliation. So this is really just the start of this work that we get to do together. And I really appreciate Darren joining us today and all the conversations I've had with him over the past many months leading up to drafting the land acknowledgement. He's been a really helpful source of information, and we've really been able to have some good conversations leading up to this point. So before we start sharing the acknowledgement, I think it's important that we really have a chance to grow our knowledge and learn about the history of the land and the people that lived on these lands before we did. So I'm going to give a little bit of a bio for Darren, and then we will get into our conversation. So prior to working with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Darren was an educator in the elementary schools in Southern Ontario. Specializing in a teacher of history and geography, he also served as a principal and curriculum coordinator. In the recent years, he has worked for the MCFN as the Traditional Knowledge and Land Coordinator for the Mississaugas of the New Credit Department of Consultation and Accommodation. His work in the department primarily consists of educating project proponents about the history of treaty lands, territory, and people of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So thank you, Darren. I'm just going to move this down so Darren can come over and share with us.
Thank you.
I know it's fancy. It's nice. Jumped on me, but seems okay. I don't know what it did. It looks okay. Yeah, maybe I'll push it up. Oh no, it's still going. So yeah, just keeping us awake. There we go. Your microphone's on there, and you can just click through. Need anything,
Well, maybe I should bend down a little bit, but thank you for the introduction. It's, oh, I have to press something, and I can press it down, yes.
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. They didn't have this technology when I was teaching. I wish I could have had it in those days. But anyway, it's, thank you for the introduction, and it's wonderful to be here. So in our language, we say, Ani Bozo, it's good to be here with you this afternoon. And I thank you for the work that you're doing on a land acknowledgement. It's very important to First Nation people, Indigenous people all over Canada to get recognition in the land acknowledgement of our past time on the land. So my job for the next hour, if I really feel long-winded, an hour and a half, to educate you a little bit about the treaty partners you have in the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So I think I was I don't know if in the introduction, I am a band member of the First Nation, so I want to point that out too. So I come from just not an outside person speaking about the history of the First Nation. I actually am a band member working for the First Nation. So now I'm going to sit down because you know the word says in the Bible, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That's the way I'm kind of am nowadays. You get a little older, things start falling apart. And so now I'm going to learn how to press this. Oh, wrong way. Oh, wonderful.
We have limited insurance.
Yes, 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 yes. Wonderful. So now I'm going to advance this slide. Now, is there something else I have to do? This here. Oh, wonderful. I did it. We're still here, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. You might have heard us before, might have heard of us as the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. That's the name we went with for until about 5 years ago. We had a community meeting one Saturday and it was said, what's this new in our name? What's this Mississaugas of the New Credit? There's nothing new about us. We're a very ancient people. We've been around for years. What's this new? It resonated with the community. It resonated with our chief and council. And so we struck out the name, and now we're simply known as the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And the title is We're Still Here. Many people don't realize that we are the treaty holders at the western end of Lake Ontario. We're the only treaty holders recognized by the British Crown in the former days, and the only treaty holders recognized by the Canadian government at the western end of Lake Ontario. So it's a status we're very, very proud of, but we're still here. When people talk of First Nations, they often think of us in the past, but we're still a vibrant and vital people in this day and age. So let's get started. Who are the Mississaugas? Well, we're a lot different from our next door neighbors, the Haudenosaunee people, or you probably know them better as the Six Nations of the Grand. Okay. While the Six Nations of the Grand are primarily agriculturalists and farmers, and I'm sure you know enough about the archaeology of this land to appreciate the long houses and the huge fields they planted of corn, beans, and squash, we're a different group of people. We actually are a seasonally migrant people. We move with the seasons. We don't stay in any one place for long periods of time. Okay, one season here, another season there. We have seasonal rounds. Anyway, you won't find the Mississaugas outside of Ontario as a nation anyway. Individual band members, yes, but as nations, no. We're limited to Ontario. We're actually a subgroup of the Ojibwe people. You might have heard the term Chippewa too. Chippewa is more of an American term. But Chippewa, Ojibwe, we're a subgroup of that. We're not really sure how we got the name Mississauga. In our own language, we refer to ourselves as the Anishinaabe people, okay, or just simply the people or the human beings, you know. We did not give ourselves the name Mississauga. That was something given to us by the Europeans. There's a lot of conjecture on what the name means. Perhaps it refers to the Eagle clan, which was what Mississauga sounds like, because most of our people belonged to the Eagle clan many years ago. Or perhaps it means that we were people living at the mouths of many rivers, another characteristic of our people. We're not sure how we got the name, but once it was attributed to us, we ran with it. So when you think about the Mississaugas, think about the Ojibwe people living on the north shore of Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. That's where you will find us. We have our own migration story of all things. We didn't start in the Great Lakes region. We started, if you can see that on the map, it's a bit of a glare with the chandelier. We started at the Maritimes, the Great Salt Water, we called it. In response to an ancient prophecy, we were told to move because the light-skinned race was coming from across the water, and if we wanted to escape them, we had to move farther inland. And so you can see this is about 900, we think. First Nations people don't tell time exactly like the Europeans do. We paint with rather broad strokes. So about 900, we migrated down the St. Lawrence to escape the newcomers, and we moved into the Great Lakes Basin. And you can see the yellow line traces our migration route. The migration finally ended in Madeline Island at the western end of Lake Superior. But not all groups made the total migration. A lot of us split off, and you can see the little arrows going off the main migration path. And that's what happened with the Mississaugas. We split off at the north shore of Georgian Bay and Lake Huron. Okay, and you can see us up there on the map. Up above Manitoulin Island, you'll see us there. Okay, and you can see the lay of the land for southern Ontario in 1634. 1634 is a big date for us. That's the first time the Europeans first found us. I don't like using the term found us. I like to use the term encounter us because we really weren't lost. We knew where we were. The first explorer was Jean Nicolet, and we loved the coming of the French in 1634. They brought us European trade goods, wonderful things. If you ever try and skin out a moose using a flint knife, as opposed to a European blade, or you try and sew with bone needles and sinuous thread, as compared to European thread and European bolts of cloth, or even try and chop down a tree with a stick lashed to a stone, as opposed to an iron axe. You can see how much those European trade goods were great for us. They made life easier for us, okay? And that's the same with all those First Nations that you see on this map, except the ones below Lake Ontario. We'll get to them in a little bit. But all the other ones you see there, the Huron-Wendat, the Tobacco, the Attawandaron, and the Mississaugas, we were involved in the fur trade with the French. Okay? Very much involved in the fur trade with the French. And as I said, we liked those European trade goods. Below Lake Ontario, there's another set of people. These are known as the Haudenosaunee. That's where they originate from, what becomes New York State. In 1634, however, they weren't trading with the French. They were trading with the Dutch. It was the Dutch that, I'll put in air quotes here, controlled that part of North America. They also brought European trade goods that the Haudenosaunee loved. But the Haudenosaunee had a problem. They had trapped their beavers almost to the point of extinction. And so they needed to go elsewhere to find pelts so they could continue in the fur trade. So about 1649, 1650, they left what is now New York State and moved into southern Ontario, dispersing all those nations that you see there. The Huron-Wendat, the Neutral. For you folks, that's most important, the Neutral, because they were actually controlling this part of Ontario where you are situated, okay? So all those nations were dispersed, okay? And that would have been well and fine from the Mississaugas perspective, because we were still in the north. But the Haudenosaunee kept moving around the lake. Okay, matter of fact, they keep moving around the lake, and we fight a defensive war against them with our allies. We're allied with the Potawatomi people, the Odawa people, the Algonquins. There's a few other ones thrown in there for good measure. But we fight a defensive war. The Haudenosaunee attack, we defend, retreat backwards. They attack, we defend, we retreat. And they push all the way as far as Sault Ste. Marie around the lake, so a fairly good distance. But finally, our allies and ourselves, we decide to counterattack late 1680, 1685 or so. Okay, and you can see that large, thick red arrow that you see coming down from the top left-hand side of the map is the route the Mississaugas took to counterattack the Haudenosaunee folks. And we have our first major offensive battle in Aurelia around Casino Rama area. Of course, you don't know about Casino Rama. That's a bad place to go. That's what they tell me anyway. I wouldn't know. But anyway, we come down or have our first major offensive battle. And actually, it's a very successful battle. And we split up the Mississaugas. One larger group travels to the east, and you can see them on the map there. They emerge in the Peterborough area, fighting the Haudenosaunee all the way. They eventually succeed in driving them away from the eastern end of Lake Ontario. And those Mississauga nations remain in the Peterborough area to this day. You know them as the folks of Mississaugas of Scugog, Rice Lake, Alderville, and Curve Lake. If you're out that way, you can visit them to this very day. My ancestors, who become the Mississaugas of the Credit, we drive the Haudenosaunee out from the western end of Lake Ontario. We come down the Humber River or the Toronto Carrying Place Trail and fight them at this end. And our last battles are fought at Burlington Bay. Okay, our oral tradition tells us that we left 2 of their warriors alive at those final battles. When we left them alive with the purpose that they would go back below Lake Ontario and tell the rest of the Haudenosaunee that southern Ontario now belonged to the Haudenosaunee people, not just the Mississaugas, but the Ottawas, the Potawatomis, and others that moved into southern Ontario. And so the wars ended in 1701 with the Great Peace of Montreal. Okay, it was a peace treaty brokered by the French, and wisely so, simply because it was not good for the French beaver pelt business to have the First Nations fighting one another. It was not good for business. So they brokered a peace in 1701, and there, more or less, things calmed down in the Great Lakes region. There was no more competition for control of the fur trade. So when the peace is brokered in 1701, this is what the Mississaugas of the Credit claim as their territory. Okay, and if you look at the map, you'll see our eastern boundary is the Rouge River in Toronto area. You might know it as Rouge Urban National Park nowadays. If you go to the head of the Rouge River and travel westward until you come to the headwaters of the Thames River, and then follow the Thames River down all the way to Long Point on Lake Erie, and follow the red line around Lake Erie, the Niagara River, Lake Ontario until you get back to the Rouge again. That's about 4 million acres of land that the Mississaugas claim as their territory. Okay. And once again, we lived a very, very seasonally migrant lifestyle. Living lightly on the land. One season here, well, let's talk about it. In spring, we would gather maple syrup, and then we would assemble at our fisheries, which are always on these rivers that you see I've marked out there, because I think I said it earlier, we're a water people. We always pitched our wigwams in the spring on the flats of major rivers and creeks flowing into these large bodies of water. And that was to partake of the fisheries. When we lived in the north, it was sturgeon. We come down here into southern Ontario, it's salmon. But salmon fishery in the spring and the fall, and in the summer and in the winter, we dispersed throughout our 4 million acres of land in small family hunting groups. Okay, where we'd gather what we needed for sustenance, whether it was birch bark for our canoes, whether it was birch bark for the wigwams, whether it was hunting for the rabbits or the deer or whatever. Okay, a seasonally migrant lifestyle. And you'll recognize many of those rivers that you see there, the Humber, Etobicoke Creek, 12 Mile Creek, Bronte Creek. But one river was more important than all the others for us, and that's number 4 up there. We called it the Missinaihi, which means trusting creek. But you probably know it better as the Credit River. Okay, the Credit River, right downtown Mississauga. Okay. no matter where we were, at least once a year, I like to say, we assembled en masse at the Credit River, always in the spring to partake of the salmon fishery, but also to talk over matters of diplomacy, peace, warfare, to engage in ceremony, to find spouses for each other, because we were out on the land after the winter, so we come together to find spouses. It was a time to trade because we traded with the French, and enterprising people that we were when the French were bested in at the Plains of Abraham in 1759, we began trading with the British too. Up until the time the French were bested by the British, we used to play off both nations against each other. You know, the French made cheaper trade goods. The British were more durable. Trade goods were more durable. We played off those two groups to see whichever deal we could get. But in 1759, as I said, the French are finally defeated by the British, and the British become the only game in town for us. Anyway, the left-hand picture is one of the upper reaches of the Credit River. Still looking fairly pristine, the mouth of the Credit where we used to converge, all concreted over nowadays. Would be strangers in our own lands. But anyway, and I like the picture at the left. There's a picture of our wigwams, nice portable structures, okay, that we could pick up and move anytime we wanted. The interesting thing about, well, we'll leave that anyway. In spring was normally our trading time. 1722, the French built a trading post near our river, and sometimes we would need a trade good outside of spring, maybe winter or fall. We needed that copper pot or that iron axe. And so we would go to the trader and ask for that good. Mind you, we'd also explain to him that we did not have the pelts at that time to pay for the good because those usually came in the spring. And so he would let us take the good as long as we promised to pay him back when the next catch of furs came in. So he extended credit to us. The Missinaihi becomes known as the Credit River, and we to this day are known as the Mississaugas of the Credit. There's also a bit of oral tradition amongst our people that we are also the good credit Indians, that if Credit Karma were around 300 years ago and they were giving us a rating, we would have got a score of about 800 out of 900 anyway, because if one of our band members could not pay off the trader, another band member would step in and pay off the bill. So we were known as the good credit people because we did look after our bills, something we're very proud of today. So 1759, the French are bested on the Plains of Abraham. 1763, a peace treaty is reached between the British and the French, the Treaty of Paris. The British suddenly find themselves taking over the French lands in North America. Now they have to run them. And so they have something called the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which is going to lay out rules for treaty making. Okay, because one thing about the French, one thing we actually really liked about the French, beside the trade goods, is that they never wanted our land. That's maybe not entirely true. They did want land now and then for maybe a chapel or a trading post, but they didn't want huge land for farms. They weren't interested in that. The British are a different group of people. They're interested in land for farming, okay? And that starts a new period in our history I like to call the treaty-making period. It's not that treaty-making was new to us, it just took on a different form with the British. Long before the British arrived, long before the French even arrived, we made treaties with each other as nations. A treaty is nothing more than a negotiated agreement between nations, and it's usually memorialized in some way. Back before the coming of the settlers, we memorialized our treaties in wampum belts. The terms of the treaty are woven right in the wampum belt. If you look at the belt there, that's known as the Ojibwe-Iroquois Friendship Belt. One rectangular patch represents the Ojibwe or the Anishinaabe people. The other patch represents the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois people. And there's a path of peace going between them. Some people say it's a path of communication going between them. That was the treaty, woven right in with the beadwork. But once we began the treaty making with the British, things become much, much more complicated and complex. You're not going to weave a British treaty into a wampum belt. Okay, so we have to take up our treaties and have them on paper. And what you see there is an excerpt from a treaty with the British. That's actually for our Brant Tract treaties, you see. Those are for the lands that cover Burlington, downtown Burlington that you see there. So there's a map, there's the crown signatories, and there's the dotems, or the signatures, if you will, of our chiefs. Okay, so you'll see our chief's name. His name is Wabanese, the first one, and you'll see there's a little animal figure beside him representing the clan that he leads. Okay, so when the chief drew his dotem on the treaty, or sketched his dotem on the treaty, that meant that not only he gave assent to the treaty, but that the Eagle clan members also gave assent to the treaty. It was not a unilateral decision by the chief. We did everything by consensus. We talked and talked and talked and talked until we got some kind of consensus going, and then they would have fixed the treaty. Now, normally I play a game at this point called Guess the Dotem, but you're council members, so I have to give you a little more. I'm going to ask anyway, just because I want to. You see that first dotem that you see by the name of Wabanese? Anybody want to hazard a guess what that first dotem represents? Anybody want to have a go at all? I always get a kick. Yeah, sure, go ahead. I love it.
Looks like a fish to me.
No, it's not a fish. Not a fish. Yeah, it is an eagle. That's a good guess because the first time I saw it, I thought it was a goose. Okay, I'm not saying my ancestors were the greatest artists going along. But you can tell it's an eagle by the claws coming off of it. And this is the one that always gets me because the second one, anybody want to hazard a guess what that is?
Beaver?
That's not bad either. Who said that? Was that you again? Oh, well, that's a pretty close guess, but it's not a beaver. Yeah?
Otter?
It is an otter. You're looking down on him as he's swimming underneath. First time I saw that one, I thought it was a catfish or something. Like I said, not the greatest artists, but when they affixed their dotem to the paper, we knew that there was a consensus among the people that this treaty was a good thing. Like I said, that's for Burlington. So, the Royal Proclamation of 1763. The British had to figure out how they were going to administer North America now that the French were gone. And so they set out rules for that, partly to assimilate the French into Anglo culture. They failed miserably at that. And the other thing they were supposed to do was set up rules for acquiring First Nations land. You see, the British weren't interested in land taking it by force. They were going to do it through negotiations. They recognized the sovereignty of the First Nation over the land it occupied. So the Mississaugas were recognized as a sovereign nation over the western end of Lake Ontario. The Haudenosaunee were recognized as a sovereign people over the southern portion, over the south of Lake Ontario. So the British very much recognized a nation-to-nation relationship and let them run their own affairs in those days. Okay, and the British decided under this royal proclamation that only the British Crown could acquire First Nations land. Individual settlers could not just go to the First Nation and ask for land. The Crown would acquire the land and then it would distribute it to the settlers. It was not going to be like what occurred in the United States or what became the United States. Individual people could approach the First Nations and acquire land. That led to a lot of, how do I say it? I want to call some of them were shysters, let's put it this way, and ripped off the First Nations for their lands. Anyway, that wasn't going to happen in the land that became Canada. Okay, a nation-to-nation relationship. The British Crown could only acquire the land and then they would distribute it to the settlers. And First Nations were sovereign over their own lands. By the way, the Royal Proclamation is still in the Canadian Constitution to this day, Section 35, if you read it. Rights recognized under the Royal Proclamation are recognized under the Canadian Constitution even today. So still very much in play. So and as recognition of that Royal Proclamation, a recognition that the First Nations accepted that arrangement and the Crown accepted us, we were all summoned to Niagara in 1764. 24 First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, including the Haudenosaunee, and others, were all called to Fort Niagara. Any of you familiar with Fort Niagara on the American side, across from Niagara on the Lake? You can see anyway. We were all summoned there to discuss the Royal Proclamation, and we all gave our assent to it. And in honor of the occasion and to honor the nation-to-nation relationship, the British Crown honored us by giving us this treaty belt. It's called the Silver Covenant Chain of Friendship belt, or just the Covenant Chain belt. And this was to commemorate, like I said, an alliance between the British and the First Nations. Both sides recognized they were on the land, that they were living together as friends and allies. And the chain, or the bond, you can see the chain, the links of the chain right in that belt, bound us together. Okay? And it said that and notice the two men in the middle. One represents Indigenous people, the 24 First Nations, and the other represents the British Crown. We're joined inseparably. The bond was supposed to be so strong that if a tree were to fall onto the wrists that were clasped, they would not break. Okay, but that's that nation-to-nation relationship. That's the friendship, the allyship that was recognized. Okay, and the British extended this to us. And you know, a strange thing is World War I, World War II, the Boer War, many of our people did not enlist to fight for Canada. Many of our people enlisted to fight for the Crown because of that alliance in 1764. Okay. Now, there's a joke we have at New Credit. I still call it New Credit, by the way, force of habit after 50 some odd years. The joke is this: how can you tell the British figure from the Indigenous figure or the First Nations figure? Anybody brave enough to hazard a guess with that? Notice any major difference? Oh, I see somebody making a gesture. Right, that's the figure you see on the right-hand side. Right, that's the British figure. You've got that right. And how do we do? We say at New Credit, that's because the figure has a black heart. That's how we can tell them apart. Now, we laugh about it a lot at New Credit. Okay, we think it's a bit of a joke, but it really characterizes how the treaty-making period is going to go for us. Okay, it really does. We kind of laugh about it, but it's kind of a bittersweet laugh. Here's our territory again. You can see the large, thick black line indicating our territory. But then you see all those colors. Each color represents another treaty we have with the Crown. The Mississaugas have 8 treaties with the Crown at the western end of Lake Ontario. Okay, and what starts the treaty making process off in earnest is that thing called the American Revolution. You remember the Americans had 13 colonies along the eastern seaboard of of what becomes the United States, and they started in the early 1600s. Well, those colonies grew up. They had their own assemblies, their own legislatures, their own congresses, and decided they were tired of listening to King George III in the British Parliament and wanted to throw off the yoke of the king. And so 1775, this thing called the American Revolution starts, and the land becomes divided into 2 groups, those that want to remain loyal to the king and those that want to break away. We know them as patriots. Well, there are, like I said, many who want to remain loyal to George III. We call them loyalists. And awful things could happen to you if you were a loyalist. You could literally be tarred and feathered. Literally, heat up hot tar, throw it on you, and dump a pile of feathers on you. Thrown in jail, property confiscated, all kinds of nasty things. But if you could make your way north into British possessions, you would be rewarded for your loyalty. The Crown would reward you with land, and it would reward you with farm equipment, seed, and so on. You could get a brand new start in British held possessions. So many of those loyalists head north, okay, placing tremendous pressure on the British Crown to acquire land for them. And who has land? The First Nations. And so remember the terms of the Royal Proclamation. The British are going to negotiate for the land, and they do. They do. The very first treaty, I can see it now. The very first treaty the British make with the Mississaugas of the credit is for a strip of land that you see there on the west bank of the Niagara River. It's enclosed in the red that you see on the map. It's a strip of land about 6.5 kilometers wide, 4 miles wide if you want to go imperial. The British needed that land to feed British troops during the Revolutionary War. Okay, so they needed agricultural land, and they needed a nice safe passage around Niagara Falls, okay, to transport their goods. And so they come to my people in 1781 and ask for that, and we readily agree. You'll never guess what they gave us for that strip of land. You know those nice British red coats with all the brass buttons and the nice facings and so on? They gave us 300 of those. That's what we got for that land. And the joke, the man that negotiated the deal, his name is Sir Guy Johnson, joked to his friends that he really hadn't paid the Mississaugas anything for the land because he was going to give us those coats anyway for fighting on behalf of the British during the Revolution. So he was giving us our own present for payment, I guess, if you will. So he pulled a fast one on us, but it told the Mississaugas, told our people that the British recognized us as the stewards, the controllers, the occupants at the western end of Lake Ontario. So it did affirm our claim for the western end of Lake Ontario. Now, so that was 1781, 2 years yet for the American Revolutionary War to run its course. Of course, we know how that ended up. The British lose. Okay, the British lose. Now, this treaty comes directly out of that loss. Remember those Haudenosaunee we drove out at the end of the Beaver Wars and said, no, come back, Southern Ontario belongs to the Anishinaabe people? Well, they, like us, had fought for the British Crown during the American Revolution. But the sad thing for them was the British made no provision for them when the British lost that war. So many of the Haudenosaunee people under the leadership of Joseph Brant had lost their homes. They needed a new place to go, a new home. And so they approached Governor Haldeman, the governor of Quebec, because that's what this place was known at that time as. It was known as Quebec. He was approached by Brant and asked for a strip of land. And Brant selected that black outline that you see on the map. Okay, it's a strip of land 6 miles wide on either side of the Grand River from its mouth to its head up in Dundalk. But before the Crown could grant that land to Joseph Brant, he had to come to the Mississaugas, remember the terms of the Royal Proclamation, acquire the land from the First Nation, and then he could grant it to settlers or whoever the British wanted to grant it to. So in this case, he approached the Mississaugas of the Credit, told us of his plans, and we assented and entered into the Treaty Number 3, or the Between the Lakes Treaty as we call it. Okay, and so that treaty was negotiated in 1784. Joseph Brant and about 2,000 Haudenosaunee followers moved into that tract of land that you see there today, well, up on that map today, and there they remain to this day. Okay, always very much in the news, quite a source of controversy even to this, to this day, but known as the Haldeman Tract lands, the Haldeman Grant lands, but I do point out that the federal government sees them as a grant of land, not a treaty. Okay, it's not treaty lands. Though I know the Ontario government differs, which complicates things even more. The province says it is a treaty, the feds say it's not a treaty, and I just say, well, the federal government is responsible for Indian affairs. Or pardon me, is it Indigenous affairs nowadays? By the way, I use the term Indians quite liberally. I don't advise you to use it. It's not politically correct. I have a card in my wallet that says that's exactly what I am, an Indian under the Indian Act. No, I'm not Aboriginal, I'm not Indigenous. It says I'm an Indian under the Indian Act. We use it, but I realize out there it's not wise for you folks to use it. But anyway, that's how the Haudenosaunee moved back into southern Ontario. Okay, and like I said, still a source of controversy to this day. Anyway, the date says 1792 because the treaty was ratified in 1792 between the British and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So that's why there's some discrepancy in date, though the initial treaty was negotiated in 1784. Now, so once again, I just show this map here, especially when I'm in along the Grand River, Kitchener, Cambridge, those places, just to show that this is a map from 1818. I like to show it because it shows that Grand River tract was not for the exclusive use of the Haudenosaunee folks. Matter of fact, I think it might be kind of hard for you to see it on there, and I don't have a pointer up there. But if you look very carefully, you might see a Mississauga settlement there, if you look very carefully. Okay, and that's 1818. And as late as 1837, the Mississaugas were camping along the Grand River in Fergus, Ontario. Are any of you familiar with Fergus? Bellside, the national, it's not a national park, what do I call it? I guess it's a place of national historic significance anyway. And there we were still camping there as late as 1837. Okay, so we were still in that area, okay, still in that area, even after the Haldeman Proclamation. Oh, there's Fergus Bellside again. Don't have to worry about that. So anyway, 8 treaties with the Crown. And I always say this about these treaties. In the early treaties, there was no meeting of the minds between the First Nations and the Crown. For First Nations, we don't believe in land ownership, at least back then. We didn't. Nowadays, it's a different story. We shared the land. We would steward the land. We'd occupy the land. We'd control the land, but we didn't own it. Okay? Even today, it seems a little bit absurd to me and some of our people. When you own land, how far down do you own it? 1 foot? 2 feet? A yard? Oop, I should be in metric nowadays. A meter? Or how high above do you own the land? Or the sky or whatever is above the land? Okay, we say we don't own the land. The land makes a claim on us. We don't make a claim on the land, okay? So we share the land. That's what we thought we were doing when we entered into the treaties. We were sharing. The settlers would do their thing. We weren't stupid. We knew they were going to build roads, establish villages, erect farms. We knew that, but that was okay. You do your thing. We would do ours. We would hunt, fish, gather, carry out our traditional lifestyle. We were in it for sharing. The British, on the other hand, thought they were getting a purchase outright, that it was theirs. And it was theirs to do with what they want. Like I say, as long as you're not messing around and disregarding some bylaw or another, you can pretty much do what you want with your land. It's yours. Okay, so the British regard it as a land purchase, and you can look at our treaties. They're all online, you can read them. The early treaties, you'll see it's a land description. Go from point A to point B to C to D. You get a polygon of some sort. That's the land boundaries. And here's what we're giving you in consideration for the treaty that you're on, Treaty Number 3. Paris is in Treaty Number 3, or the Between the Lakes Treaty. The British Crown gave us £1,180 of one-time payment for almost 3/5 of our land. Okay. But an outright purchase. Okay. So when you look at those treaties, and I challenge you to look for them online, they're there, you will see they're silent about rights. They do not extend us treaty rights. They do not say you shall have the right to this, nor do they take away rights. So as a First Nation, we talk about our inherent rights. And so some of those inherent rights include the right to self-determination, the right to stewardship, the right to harvest, the right to be sustained by our land's water and resources. Okay. And so we say that's still there, still there. It's not something that the government extended to us. Okay. So no meeting of the minds between the Indigenous folks and the British Crown. 8 treaties with the Crown, disastrous for us. Disastrous for us. Okay. There were 500 Mississaugas of the credit when the treaty-making process began, over 4 million acres of land. The treaty-making process starts in 1781, 500 of us. By the time the treaty-making process ends in 1820, our population dropped. In 1795, about the time of that Brant Tract purchase for Burlington, we were down to 400. By the time we agreed to the orange parcel of land that you see there, the Toronto purchase, we're down to 300. About the time of that treaty, we woke up and realized we weren't sharing with the settlers. And so when the Crown negotiator comes again, his name is Colonel Claus, we say to him, Father, why have you treated us so badly? You run us from our land, you drive us from our camping spots, you shoot our dogs, you threaten to shoot us. Why are we so ill treated? When you asked for land before, we cheerfully gave it. And here you are now. Why are we so ill treated? Mind you, by then we were in no position to argue with the British Crown. There's over 25,000 settlers that have inundated our lands. And now there's only 300 of us. You can see how vastly outnumbered we were. So that's from the beginning to the end of the treaty making process. We started with 4 million acres of land. When the treaty making process ended, we were down to 200 acres of land. You can do the math. That's 1 acre per person. You know, who's going to be supported by 1 acre of land? Okay. It's a bitter pill to swallow for those of us that, for those of our people that just we're sharing the land. Okay, it didn't turn out that way. So very, very disastrous time for us. Matter of fact, when we signed our treaties in 1820, we said to Colonel Claus, we said to him, Father, take the land, for we will not be around much longer to enjoy it. You see, we thought we would be extinct. The Crown thought we would be extinct. Extinct as a nation, that is, that we would disintegrate as a nation. Fortunately, that didn't happen. This gentleman came to our rescue. And he was actually, I won't say he's a citizen of Paris, but he lived around here at the time. His father certainly lived around here at the time. This man's name is the Reverend Peter Jones. He's got a very interesting lineage. His father is Augustus Jones, the deputy provincial surveyor. And he surveyed much of the land in the greater Golden Horseshoe area. But he's a surveyor. He has a family, wife, and kids at home. But he's lonely out on the land, and well, you know how things go. He hooks up with a Mississauga of the Credit woman by the name of Tuba Bananaque and has 2 sons by her, John Jones and this boy, Peter. He's not interested in raising these 2 boys. Remember, he's got a family elsewhere, so he leaves them to be raised by the Credit River people. And they learn everything they need to know about being good First Nations boys. Okay, they learn the ceremonies, they know the cultural norms, they know the mores, they know to hunt and fish such as it was at this time, because he's born in 1802. It's not going good for our nation at this time. Okay, anyway, 1816, Augustus, the father, takes the 2 boys away from the River Credit people because he fears they're going to be extinct, like the rest of the band is expected to be. So he takes the boys away, first moves to Stony Creek and then to Paris. They get a settler education, reading, writing, arithmetic. The older boy becomes a surveyor like his dad, and this boy here becomes a brickmaker. Well, one day he's about 21 years old. He decides to visit a camp meeting, a Methodist camp meeting near Ancaster, Ontario, because he's curious. So he walks from Paris to Ancaster, and he says he gets the good religion. He becomes a Methodist, and he takes to it like a duck to water. You can see the name, Reverend Peter Jones. 1823, he's converted to Methodism, and he decides the way to save the Mississaugas from extinction is to convert them to Christianity, and second of all, teach them reading, writing, arithmetic, and agriculture. And in that way, he hopes will avert extinction. And you know, by 1825, he succeeds. Does he ever succeed? By 1825, all but 2 families of the Mississaugas are converted to Christianity, and we do so willingly. No one held a gun to our heads. We realized the old ways weren't working. We had, what's the term I learned from Doug Ford during the pandemic? We learned to pivot. And we pivoted, okay, and we did so. And we adopted a whole new lifestyle. We became Christian agrarians, Christian farmers. And we did quite well. 1825, with the help of the government, a mission village is began. And in 1826, we actually move in. Okay, let's see if I got a picture. Whoop. There we go. We move into the Christian mission village on the Credit River in what is now, of course, we know as prime real estate, downtown Mississauga, for heaven's sake. We move into this Christian mission village and we completely transform our lives. Gone are the hunting, fishing, gathering ways. We're Christian farmers and we do well with it. Okay. No, we're not interested in corn, beans, and squash. Forget that. We're interested in oats, wheat, barley, fruit trees we establish, potatoes, things like that, the cash crops of the day. We learn all about animal husbandry. Before we used to have one domestic animal, the dog, that was it. Now we learn about pigs, cows, oxen, horses. Want to guess what the first domestic animal we raised at the Credit River? The lowly chicken. Chief Crane's wife saw that Chief Crane's wife saw that the settler ladies were raising chickens for eggs and meat, and she wanted to emulate those Christian women. So she started raising chickens with the same purpose. Okay, so we really, really made the pivot, if you will. So we learned about business. Okay, we build a sawmill, we build a grist mill, we have carpenter shops, we have a blacksmith shop, we have a shoemaker, for heaven's sake. We're the major shareholders of the Credit River Harbor Company, and using our own funds, we build 2 piers out of Lake Ontario so that we can ship and receive goods. At one point in time, we even built our own schooner so that we can move our own lumber around Lake Ontario. And this is all in the span of about 21 years. Our children are literate because, remember, we became Methodists. How do you become good Christians? By reading the Bible. So we take to education, it makes us better. So we learn to read. We dress like everyday settlers. Okay, you wouldn't recognize, except for our complexion in those days, you wouldn't know we were First Nations people. So complete transformation of our lives. Complete. Okay, complete. We're even illiterate people. Our children taught us how to speak English. The children will learn English in school and teach the adults, people my age, how to learn to speak the language. So wonderful stuff, complete transformation, but there's always a problem. You see, we cleared 900 acres of land, planted all these wonderful crops, established this mission village, and was thriving. It's a model mission village for other villages in Upper Canada. But we don't get title to our land. Even though we did all that work, we didn't get title to our lands. And you know what? The settlers kept coming. The settlers kept coming and even encroaching on our last pieces of land. And very tragic for us. So we had to look around for other places to go. So we accepted an offer to move to Owen Sound, of all places. And so we sent an exploratory team of our men up there to look the land over. And they came back and said, we can't move up there. It's too rocky. There's not enough water. That meant a lot to us. We were Christian farmers, agriculturalists now. We couldn't go to farmland that wouldn't support us. But the die was already cast. The land had already been put up for sale by the Crown. We were about to be homeless. You see, and that's a problem we face even today. I live at New Credit. I get a certificate of possession for my land. I don't own it. Don't own it. Okay, so that's a problem we face today, a problem we faced back then. Matter of fact, we even sent our chief, Peter Jones, the man that you saw there. He went to see Queen Victoria and actually got a promise from the Queen of all things that we would get title to our lands back then. But sadly, the Prime Minister that was supposed to put it into effect, our Colonial Secretary that was supposed to put it into effect, Lord Glenelg, resigned from his post before he could put her rule into effect. And well, it never came about. Okay, we never did get title to our lands. So anyway, the land goes up for sale at the Credit River in 1847, and we're about to be homeless. What are we going to do? Well, you'll never guess who came to our rescue. Remember those Haudenosaunee folks that we said we kicked out at the end of the Beaver Wars and said, don't come back? And then we signed Treaty Number 3 that allowed them to come back? Well, they heard about our homeless plight, and in the spirit of reciprocity, because that's one thing First Nations believe strongly in is reciprocity, they invited us to take up land on their portion of land. And so in 1847, Chief Peter Jones and another chief, Joseph Sawyer, came down and accepted their invitation to take up that land. And the Six Nations were very, very upfront about it and said they remembered what we had done for them at the time of the American Revolution with Treaty Number 3, and they were going to return the favor to us. So in 1847, we moved from the Credit River down to where we live today, just outside of Hagersville. And you can kind of see it on that map. I don't know what you folks can see on there. It's pretty glaring for me. Anyway, this is where we live today. Our reserve is 6,000 acres. This is what we took up, 4,800 acres in Brant County. That's that large square that you see. And a smaller piece that straddles Haldeman County, into Haldeman County. Okay, about 250 of us move here. Okay, so our population has expanded a bit since you last heard from us. We're up, I guess what would be 20% in the years we spent at the Mission Village. Not too shabby. And we all move here in 1847 and take up land. Okay, and we never can replicate what we had at the Credit River. Okay, we can never replicate that. There we had the hospital, we had the school, we had the church, we had the mills and so on. We move here and it's really quite disappointing for us because if you heard earlier, we were water people. We always lived right beside the water, and that was true at the Mission Village. But when we move here, we have two small creeks flowing through our reserve, and you know those things dry up. Okay, they dry up in a good hot summer. No schooner, no mills. But the one thing we can do yet is farm, and we're known for our farming even then. But even the wheels start to fall off farming. Okay, think about 250 of us move in 1847. You're on the land for a generation. It's now 1867, time of Confederation. You have another generation of kids. You got to split that land. Your family farm is going to shrink. Stick around for another generation. So, okay, 1695, pardon me, 1695, what am I thinking? 1895, you got to split that land again. So family farm shrinks even more. So a family farm is not going to support a family anymore. The other thing is, goes back, there's always new technology in farming, always new technology. Maybe you need a new threshing machine or something. Well, back in those days, the settler could go to the bank, maybe put his land up for a mortgage and get that new piece of farm equipment. First Nations can't do that. They don't own their land. They can't put it up and get a loan at the bank. So we fall behind in farming. There's oral tradition in our community, and I know because it involves some of my relatives. They were still as late as the 1930s, some of us using, Pa Ingalls' little house on the prairie, get behind the horse and get out there. So we fell behind in agriculture, big time. And so that was a significant problem. It caused us to pivot once again. And so we had to move into nearby communities like Brantford, Simcoe, Hamilton, the quarries of Hagersville to work in industry. And that's what we did as we moved into the 20th century. Okay, we started moving into industry.
Okay. Uh, the only thing that gave us a leg up in agriculture again was World War One, the Great War. Nothing great about that war, I can assure you. We set off 32 of our men, I think about 13% of our population, off to fight in World War One. Most of them, all but 4, came back, which isn't bad considering the mess that World War One was. And the thing was, the government offered us soldier settlement loans at the time, so that we could get some of the farm equipment we needed. Okay, so that was the only good thing that came out of World War One, at least from our perspective, anyway. But we still fall far behind in agriculture, and our people just have to go elsewhere. And that's a problem that we face even today as a First Nation. Now, my goodness, there's 2,700 of us, so we've come a long way from extinction. But you know, only about 1/3 of our people live on the First Nation itself. Most of us have to go elsewhere to keep body and soul together. Okay, so most of our people that even live on the reserve work elsewhere. Okay, my boss at the Department of Consultation and Accommodation, his brother was Justice Harry Laforme. You might have heard of him. He was the first chairman of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and he was the first Indigenous judge on the Appellate Court of Ontario. He had to go elsewhere to be a lawyer, practice law, and become a judge. We have a medical researcher, Dr. Malcolm King, did head up. He's retired now. I believe it was the University of Alberta's Medical Research Division. Okay, we have a senator of all places in Australia. He was a journalist. He moved to Australia to practice his profession and ended up years later as a senator, still sits in the Australian Senate to this very day. So our people are dispersed fairly widely. I myself taught school elsewhere for 20 some odd years, you know. But that's a problem we face with the First Nation even today. We have a gigantic, if you will, brain drain. Now, this picture just helps me remember we're very modern people nowadays. We're not just people of the past, even though we're very sensitive and keep an eye on the past. We have modern buildings. Some people I meet at the Department of Consultation, they're amazed that we have even modern buildings. They still expect us to be a throwback yet to 100 years ago or beyond. We're modern people. We're always looking for new ways to improve ourselves, and a lot of our people. We have, for example, an energy company. We have a business development corporation. And we're always working on projects throughout our treaty lands and territory. You know of all the controversy going on in Toronto now. I think it was just on the news this morning with the revitalization of Ontario Place. They were talking about moving the Science Centre there and an Austrian therme spa there. All that controversy. Well, we're involved in that as treaty partners, okay? Or you might have heard about, perhaps, I don't know if it was big news down this way. Toronto was going to Googleize part of their waterfront with Sidewalk Labs to make a portion of Toronto a modern computerized city, a showcase for the world. Well, that raised quite a few alarm bells in Toronto. People worried about their privacy and computers and running their lives. And anyway, that deal eventually fell through, but we were part of that, okay? So we're part of a lot of things going on in Toronto now. So very much a modern people and involved in our territory and treaty lands. Now I'm just going to leave it there because more or less the history portion of it, because I always get asked when I go out, what's reconciliation mean? And my colleagues at the Department of Consultation and myself too, we say, we don't know. We know there's 94 calls to action. We know there's supposed to be a coming together between the settler folks and the Indigenous folks. But what does that mean? What does that really mean? How does that play out? I say I don't know. Quite often two-row wampum is brought out. It's not a wampum belt that is ours. We've kind of adopted it. It originates between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch people in the 1630s. One purple strand represented an indigenous canoe, and the other purple strand represented a settler ship. They're both sailing in parallel. The idea was that the two First Nations and the settlers were not going to interfere with each other. Okay, non-interference. Each would have their own path in the stream. They wouldn't run in. I say, and some people tout that as a model for reconciliation. I say, well, I don't think that's going to work. Let's face it, we've interfered with each other a lot. It's too late for that. You know, we've had a lot of interaction with each other, and for us, at least anyway, it hasn't been such a positive experience. But you know, I like those three beads. I don't know if you can see on that wampum belt, there's three beads that separate those two purple strands. They represent peace, respect, and friendship. And I say this is the key to reconciliation. If we can talk to each other in peace, respect, and friendship, reconciliation will take care of itself. We will talk to each other. We will learn about each other's hopes and aspirations. We'll become friends, if you will, and work together. And that'll be the start to reconciliation. We'll see where the path goes from then. It's going to be a rocky path. Sometimes it'll be a smooth path. But as long as we can talk in peace, respect, and friendship, we're on the right path, as long as we can talk that way. And so, to me, that's also the spirit of the treaties that we initially entered in. Remember that first wampum belt? Those two figures clasping hands. Peace, respect, and friendship. That's the path to reconciliation. Now, as always, I've talked too long, and I want to leave it open for some questions. And as long as none
First
of
of
you,
all, Darren, let me thank you for your
Yeah.
let me thank you for your speech and your information. I learned a great deal. Really, I did, and I thought I knew quite a lot. I didn't know nearly as much as I thought. And with that being said, I know this is a very ignorant thing for me to say. I didn't follow your election. Who's your new chief?
he's coming up in 2 weeks' time. We don't have one, and it will be a she. We can guarantee you that.
It'll be a she.
It will be a she, but we don't know which one. The election's December 9th.
Well, that's good. So before I open it up to questions, do you have a history of getting along with Six Nations? The Six Nations and do you get along?
We're cordial to each other. That's what I'll say. There's even significant intermarriage between us, but you know, there's still very much a sense that we are the Mississaugas of the Credit. They're the Six Nations of the Grand. And while we're cordial to each other, we don't often see eye to eye on how to handle issues, or even what the issues are sometimes, you know. And that's not surprising. There's 639 different First Nations in Canada. Okay.
Thank you for the honest answer. Are there any questions for Darren? We do understand your your position.
Yeah, it can be tough sometimes. But yeah.
Are there any questions for Darren? Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Darren, through you. As you can tell from my accent, I'm originally British, so I've got perhaps something to say sorry for along the way. But I am interested in your comment that you don't own your land. So who does own your land, and why can you not become the owners?
Well, first of all, the government of Canada owns the land. It's theirs, and they just allow us to live on it. And you know, the thought was, and I think it's still there today, that there's a possibility if they give the land over to us, we might, how do I say it nice? I guess I'm going to use the word squander it away. That was the reason back in the 1800s they gave us, even after Queen Victoria's order. Well, if we give it into the hands of the First Nations, they'll just sell it and they won't have anything left at all. I don't know if that's true today. You know, I don't think it is. I hope we'd be wiser than that. But I've never heard a real answer why we can't own that land today. Really, it can't be deeded over to us as a nation. I think that would be one ideal way, is to deed it over to the nation instead of individual band members, deed it over to the nation, and then still they can hold the land intact.
Any other questions? Councillor Chambers?
Not so much a question, Mr. Mayor, but just a bit of information. I've been just sitting here and you talked about Peter Jones.
Right.
If I got this right, Peter Jones's niece was married to my great grandfather,
Who's your great grandfather?
John Westbrook.
That name does sound familiar for some reason. I have to think about that a little bit, but yes, that would not surprise me.
It Peter Jones had a sister, Mary, who had a daughter, Elizabeth, who married Major John Westbrook. And Major John Westbrook is my great grandfather.
Your cousins. Councillor McAlpine.
So history is a wonderful thing, and I really appreciate your knowledge and your ability to relate history to someone that really isn't up on history. So I appreciate that very much.
Wonderful.
So just going with a small world kind of theory there. So my wife, okay, I'm not sure how many generations you have to go back, was married to John Jones, so Peter Jones's brother. And so it's, yeah.
So you're cousins too.
Yeah.
I knew it. I sensed it, but I could never prove it until now. The thing that's important, I think, is that you people have kept you still have your identity. I've been to powwows, and I've been to different things that you've held with Mayor Davis from Brantford, and when you're there, you would never know that you didn't get along with the other reserves, because you're very much alike. The spirit's there. I was there with Lieutenant Governor, and it's a wonderful place to be for a powwow or something. I mean, you can feel the spirit. You can feel the homecoming. It's all very real to me. I enjoy going to powwows, and I enjoy Six Nations, and I'm certainly much more aware of Six Nations than I am of you. But it's still there. You feel it, and you know it's real. And your story's great. I love it. I wished you owned your land, but you don't. And I think it's just a bunch of shenanigans that were done a few hundred years ago. And I mean, when you trust people, that's what happens. So there's nothing wrong with falling to the hand of someone you trust. So thank you for speaking today. If there's no other questions. Oh, Councillor Gannett, you're going to be the rant, aren't you?
Oh gosh, not at all. I really want to thank Darren today because I'm a historian by training. My graduate work was in Canadian history, and the piece that you shared with us today, despite, I don't want to count how many years I spent studying it, was missing. That was the first time, despite many years at university, that your perspective on the story was shared. And what I'm glad for in this is that we are available on YouTube, and your recollection and on behalf of your people is actually captured, so that more folks will have the opportunity to learn that, because just the way you conveyed it was, I just appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other final comments? Councillor Chambers?
Mr. Mayor, I wonder if I could ask a question to our guest.
Absolutely.
And that is this, and it's going to be kind of a question that you might want to respond to in a way. We've been talking about the people and my grandfathers and great grandfathers and the people. The people are all changing, but the one thing that doesn't change is the land, and the land is still there, and the culture that you spoke of with uh, the the philosophy or whatever you want to call it of owning land or being on the land. Uh, I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit because we've grown up with the idea of owning land and having land and putting fences around land. And the First Nations culture, as you said originally, is totally different from that. And the land is still there. The people are all different. I wonder if you could just expand a little bit on that just for a minute or two. Think we got time.
Yeah, I'm still not sure where we're going with the question, but I suppose maybe I was doing some talking about this morning to a university student. I had some questions. uh, you have to see the land or the earth as your mother. It brings forth life. And so it has to be treated with an ethos of thanksgiving, with gratefulness. You're going to want to nurture that relationship, always improve that relationship, just as you would your human mother. And you want what's benefit, what's of benefit for that mother, because you know the mother's going to benefit you if you treat her right. There's that reciprocal relationship again. Give and take and give. And even extends to the waters, waters as the lifeblood of Mother Earth. Everything's interrelated and interconnected. It can't be seen discreetly, it's not just water or not just earth or not just a tree. They have to see everything is interrelated and integrated. You can't tease anything really apart. So that's how I understand. You don't own something. I shouldn't say that. In the 21st century, we all understand what ownership meant, but back then, no concept. We might, like I said, control land, occupy it, and steward it, but we just don't own it. I don't know what else to say, really. It's tough sometimes. I'm not a philosopher, though I thought it would have been fun at one time. But anyway.
Thank you again. I'm sure there's resentment that comes with not owning land that you know is really yours or has been yours and you've been swindled out of it. So there must be some resentment. And I'm sorry that's happened to you. If there's nothing else to be said, I'm looking for a motion, please, to receive the speaker for information. Councillor Coleman and Councillor Pierce. Any other questions to the presenter? Seeing none. Councillor Pierce? Thank you. Yeah. All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Thank you very much for coming out today.
Thank you, Miigwech.
We really did learn a lot. So thank you. I need a motion to adjourn or we'll be here till, yeah, there we go. Councillor Oakley, we stand adjourned.